Hello everyone. Today's video, this is going to be part 1 of 2 in a series of arrivals. Normally I do this as a 3-parter, as in, the first part is usually kind of showing you the background. Second part is going to be flying a propeller, and the third one's going to be flying a jet. In this particular case, I'm only going to be flying a turboprop simply because arrivals can be used in solo aircraft, but generally they are not. So anyway, what's an arrival? So if you remember from way back in the day, we took a look at departures, which is basically the process of getting an aircraft onto all these nice little highways in the sky, the jetways and the Quebec Airways and everything like that. So once you're on these highways in the sky, at some point you're going to have to come back down and go ahead and land at an airport. The actual process of instrument landing at an airport is called an approach. The process of getting to the approach is called an arrival. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example arrival. Let's say, for example, I'm going to go flip back to low altitude here just to keep myself a little bit sane. Let's say we were traveling from Newark, New Jersey, which is a pretty short flight, and we're going to go up to Bradley International. Hey, fly what you know, right? And let's go ahead and say we wanted to go ahead and take off from this airport, and we wanted to fly an arrival to the airport. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the arrivals available at Bradley. So I'm going to left click here. I'm going to go over to Bradley International, and I can see if I scroll all the way down, I have these things called Standard Terminal Arrival. These are also called stars. There are 2 different ones at this particular airport. Now, if you want to see Nightmare, you can come over down here to JFK and see what we have here. Look at this. Wham! There's just a couple more terminal arrivals here. So again, the goal here is to get you from the highways in the sky all the way down to where you can land the airplane. You're not going to land the airplane from an arrival. You're just going to go grab it. So let's go back up to Bradley. I'm going to scoot over here real quick, and we'll take a look at both the Deer Park 3 as well as the Stella One Arrival. Let's go ahead and call this up and take a look at the details. Now remember, these particular things, even though they're, again, look very complicated, are actually really simple to follow. Scrolling down here real quick, you can see that all the description of the arrival is going to be from down here, and all the actual physical looking at the arrival is going to be up here. So in this case, you can see our ultimate goal here is going to be getting to Bradley International Airport. And you can see that our last waypoint is going to be called Briss. Now, how do I know that that's the last waypoint? Follow the arrows. Exactly. So basically what we have here is when you arrive in this zone, you're going to be arriving via one of these 3 waypoints. The first one's called Deer Park, which is a VOR. You also have Hampton, which is also a VOR. It's actually a VOR attack. And you have what this one's called Sardi, which is actually an intersection that's going to be located down here. Once you hit that point, all you have to do to fly the arrival is to follow the directions that it says. For example, this one says from over Deer Park VOR DME, that's over here, proceed along the 5 tree radial, which is this one right here. Again, this is a VOR station. We just dial in 5 tree to belt intersection. Now, belt intersection is pretty unique because of the fact that it is an intersection of multiple radials. But look at this. The radials are actually listed for you and even give you the frequencies that you're going to need to use in order to locate that waypoint. Now, let me show you a dark secret here. Once you hit this point, we know we've hit this point because we've been following this radial for 22 nautical miles. And since we can get a distance off of this using DME, we don't have to go crazy as far as triangulating this unless we had another reason to do so. Once we hit this waypoint, of course, we could switch over to Madison VOR and then proceed direct along the radial of 235 to hit it, fly over the top of it, and then scoot all the way over here to Briss, where then we're expected to go ahead and get radar vectors to actually land at Bradley. So looking down here, again, same thing, to belt, to intersection, then on to Madison, radial 235 to Madison VOR, then from over Madison VOR DME on MAD radial 314, that's going to be this line right here, 341, sorry. Then proceed directly to Briss, and then expect radar vectors to prime approach course. That's not bad. And what's so neat about these arrivals is basically you can be expected to fly this entire arrival on your own. You could say here, get an instruction, say, for example, descend via, the Deer Park 3 Stella Arrival or something along those lines, which would simply say that once you hit this point, you're on your own until you get close enough at which air traffic control would take over and give you instructions. Now, there's a couple little sneaky things in here. And first of all, you'll notice there's a holding pattern here. But generally what's going to happen is air traffic control is going to kind of nudge you along the way. Sometimes they'll say fly via, in which case that doesn't give you the permission to descend. Sometimes they'll give you things like proceed direct to Madison or fly transition from that point. They can give you different altitudes. And again, if they don't give those to you, you're just expected to follow what you see here. Let's go ahead and take a look at another example one. This is the Stella One Arrival. This one's a little tricky because instead of coming from the south, we're actually coming from the north in this particular case. Let me rotate it so you can get a better look at it. So in this case, we have a narrative on the following page, but we can figure it out just by looking at it. So if we were to use the Syracuse, I should say the Autal transition, we would be here at flight level 180. We'd climb along here for 126 degrees for 60 nautical miles or so of the tree 06. We'd hit Rockdale VOR. We'd drop down to 11,000 feet, proceed direct to Swede, which we could identify. Now notice, if we're coming from Hancock instead of over here at Autal, we'd actually be showing up at 18,000 feet as opposed to 11,000 feet. But regardless, we're going to hit Swede. Now take a look at this. Expect flight level 230, and it has this funky little line here. All that says is you're going to be less than 230. Now, fun fact, if you're already 11,000 feet, remember, do what air traffic control tells you, not what the thing says, unless they say otherwise, we're already good to go. Now we're going to proceed along this line here for 54 nautical miles. Yeah, 54. Now I understand why we don't use Cessna 172s for these. We go all the way to Canaan. To find Canaan, it's really, really easy. By the way, this is like Ohio right here, and you can see Syracuse is all upstate New York, so this is a huge distance you're traveling. Again, think jets. So we're going to get to Canaan intersection. We're going to go ahead and take a right on that, proceed along this one. Again, gives you the distances right along the way through Shiggy. Then we're going to approach Stella. Then we have Molds, and we have Tomes. Fun fact, our destination is actually right here. So what could happen in the real world is you could be way, way over here by Syracuse. They could say descend via the Stella One Arrival Auto transition, and they wouldn't call you back until you got all the way down here to Tomes. Now you're probably saying, that seems a little extreme. Is that really what they would do? Well, let's go take a look at the narrative real quick, shall we? There it is, Auto transition. From over this, proceed to here, then when you get there, from over Canaan intersection, go to Tomes, expect vectors to final approach course to Tomes intersection, just like we said it would be. One thing I want to point out is the fact that this arrival is actually used for multiple airports. That is not unusual in the slightest because there's so many airports in a concentrated area. And again, the arrival is just trying to get you close to the runway. So now let's go ahead and talk about our flight that we're going to be doing a little later on. So what I want to do is I want to pretend we're flying from somewhere down south, and I want to land at Bradley flying a standard arrival. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm actually going to pick one of these two arrivals. In the real world, air traffic control will tell you what arrival to expect, but the reality is you're going to know which one it's going to be, or they'll just radar vector you down to the ground. Now, if you want to see some terrifying arrivals, go look over in Heathrow. What they'll have is a situation where we fly, do a hold, fly, do a hold, fly, do a hold, fly, do a hold, all the way down to the airport. It's insanity. But again, whatever air traffic control says goes. In the United States, at least now, with the reduced air traffic, it's not unusual for them to literally just say, descend via this arrival. We'll basically call you when you get there. So let's go ahead and put one of these together, shall we? So we're going to pretend we were coming from down south and we want to arrive up here. So we're going to use this one here because this one makes the most sense. So we're going to come via, let's say, Deer Park. We'll do the Deer Park transition. So what I'm actually going to do real quick, I'm going to grab this and pull this aside so it's a little bit easier. Let's go ahead and I'm just got this in a different window to make it simpler for me to see. Whoops, I actually closed that, my bad. Let's go grab that one more time. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it right here and make it easier to read. Beautiful. All right, let's do it. So our waypoints are going to be Deer Park, which is DPK. Next one's going to be Belt, BELTT. Then we're going to proceed direct Med. Then we're going to proceed direct Briss. And you can now visually see how big this arrival is that's going to take us from wherever we are up here and bring us down. Now, if you're really sneaky, you'll notice the fact that since we're taking off from Newark, we're not actually connected to any of these. But I can bet you money if we were coming from down south, we'd be using JFK as our kind of touch-off point to get off of, for example, the Victor 116 or 229er. And if you actually look even more closely, you'll notice these arrivals are built along existing airways, with this exception right here, because again, they're trying to get you off of these so we don't go running into people or anything crazy like that. So our flight's going to be pretty straightforward. We'll start in the air. We're going to be at an altitude of 11,000, or flight level 110. We're going to cruise along this one right here until we get right here. This is Deer Park is where things are going to get kicked off right here. Then from Deer Park, again, I'm just following it. We're going to use this VOR station to guide us today because we can. We're going to proceed direct to Belt. And you can actually see visually very clearly that we can use this VOR station, which of course is a triple C here. This is Calverton, to help line us up with that. But we don't need to because we can just use the DME to read off of once we've hit that distance of 22 nautical miles. Once we hit here, we'll switch to the Madison VOR, proceed direct to here. Let's take a look at our altitudes. We're still at 11,000. We have not been given a new altitude, unless air traffic control tells us otherwise, until we get to Madison. So we're going to proceed direct over here. Here's Madison. Once we hit Madison, it's going to tell us to expect 11,000 feet. These two little lines here just tell us the fact that it's going to be 11,000. Once we get off of that, we're going to start descending from Madison until we get to Briss. And then at Briss, by now, air traffic control should call us and advise us which runway we need to land on. Now, a couple of you are probably going, all right, I can kind of see where this works. So what would an approach look like? Well, check this out. So now that we know how to get down to the approach, what would be a logical approach? Well, that's going to completely depend on the weather. But in this case, it's not unusual, at least in this part of the country. We kind of get the southwesterly wind. We could even come in here and dial in the individual pieces to our approach. In this case, it would be via Kibbe. So they'd probably give us radar vectors to Kibbe, which unfortunately for us would be a procedure turn, because we have to do a course reversal. We'd come around, and then we go ahead and do a good old-fashioned ILS approach. They could even, of course, clear us along the Connecticut River, which you're probably sitting there going, I don't see any river here. Well, let me flip it over a little second. There it is, right there. They can make you fly along this way and do a visual approach. It's completely up to them. But the important thing is they don't have to hold your hand to get through all these individual steps. So do all arrivals look like this? Unfortunately, they do not. So I'm actually going to go bother Boston for a second here because these guys are right around the corner. And you can see they have so many different types, including our Nav approaches. I'm going to show you this real quickly here. So an RNAV approach is the same thing as we saw with the previous approach, but the difference is each one of these points is not a VOR station. It's a waypoint instead, which means we have to be able to support RNAV in order. Again, RNAV is just random navigation. We have to be able to support that technology on board of aircraft. It just means you need a GPS that's basically IFR rated. Now, one thing to notice about this one, and this is a little fancy, is the fact that the range of altitudes is tremendous that they can give you. They also give you all the requirements. Notice they expect all these different things on it. Notice there's even a requirement for turbojet aircraft only, something that you probably haven't thought of because, like I mentioned, these little propeller jockeys are probably not going to be successful flying these types of routes. So look at all the things. One last thing I want to say is in case you're wondering just how steep of an approach you're actually flying, it works out to be the same angle as if you were approaching a normal runway, which would be about 3 degrees. So one of the challenges you're going to have in flying one of these is figuring out when you need to descend and how much descent you need to do in order to successfully do it. Let me go pop over to this one real quickly instead of jumping between them. For example, I have to get from flight level 180 down to flight level 110 by the time I get to Canaan intersection. Now, you're probably going to say, wait a minute, doesn't this one say expect 17,000? No, that's Cambridge, don't worry. But they'll expect you to cross 17,000, and then within 30 miles, they'll expect you to get down to 11,000. So how do we figure this out? Well, there's a really slick trick I've learned years and years and years ago. Basically, take your ground speed, so for example, 200, divide by 2, and then add a 0. That tells you what your feet per minute is going to have to be to safely descend. So in this case, if I want to come down from flight level 180 to 110, let's say again I'm doing 100 knots, which would be very slow for a flight like this. That's 8,000 feet. So we would go ahead and take our speed of 100 knots, divide by 2, which would give us 550, add a 0, 500 feet per minute. And that's all we'd have to know in order to stay roughly at a 3-degree descent. And when we do it over in the flight simulator, it'll be even easier to kind of visualize as we kind of cruise on down. But other than that, that's going to be about it. We'll take off. We'll go follow that arrival procedure. I will do it completely using the VOR as well as the different pieces. And you can kind of see how this plays out. Now, there are a couple airports around the world that have very, very specialized Very specialized approach procedures. One of my favorites, of course, is going to be over here in Aspen, Colorado, because of how dangerous it actually is in order to get here. They have super duper unique procedures that you're going to have to actually get separate from your normal terminal arrival procedures. Again, if you just want to take a quick little look, you can see there's just the mountain ranges are insane. So you have to do these really funky offset courses in order to do it. After, of course, you've flown a successful arrival, then you're going to be looking at doing approach, but that will be for other videos. So later on, I'll go ahead and fly this entire approach just as you see. I'll kind of walk you through the different steps I do, and we'll leave air traffic control out of it, but keep in mind, air traffic control ultimately has the say in all of these things. Enjoy.